There we go. Good morning and welcome everybody who has joined us this wonderful, beautiful Saturday morning. These are our first guest speakers for Pandemicon 2021. I would like to welcome Dr. Ibrahim oh my gosh. Yucel. I even wrote down my apologies, Yucel. And Paul Klotz. Dr. Yucel teaches in the Communications and Information Design program at SUNY Poly and is an advisor for the Information Design and Technology Master's program. Paul Klotz is a podcaster, streamer, and indie critic covering video games, tabletop gaming, and entertainment. Currently, he co-hosts a weekly podcast, Crash Test Pilots, with his partner, Nicole. I'd like to thank both of you so much for coming out this morning, and I'm going to just leave it over to you.
All right. Hi, everyone out there on the internet. I am Dr. Ibrahim Yucil, coordinator for interactive media and game design over at SUNY Polytechnic Institute in Utica. And we're going to talk about finding your digital community today. Paul, why don't you introduce yourself?
I'm Paul Soapbox Klotz. I'm a podcaster, an occasional Twitch streamer, and indie critic, I guess. And I've been podcasting and streaming off and on for about 6 years. All
right. And, I do talks at conventions, at academic conferences a lot. And trying to come up with a talk for today, I was trying to think, what does the Pandemicon really about? It's about community. It's about our local community here in Utica and how, even though we might not be, the largest city in central New York, we definitely have a lot of resources at our disposal around here. So I wanted to start off with giving you a little perspective on my work. I'm a professor at SUNY Polytechnic, and I'm often most often talking to students and prospective students who want to get inside the video game industry. So the most common question I get from these prospective students is, what do I need to do to get a job in the games industry? What tools do I need to use? What do I if I join your program, where will I internship? How do I break that ceiling and get in there and get that dream job that I'm looking for? And one of the more common things I ask them is, well, what are you doing right now? What communities are you a part of? Have you ever heard of a game jam? Have you ever gone online and taken a look at what is accessible in your local community and work and collaborate with people who are probably right next to you who have the same dreams as you do? You just haven't had a chance to reach out and talk with them. So what we're going to focus on today is talking about how communities are really, really important, how to reach out to these communities in digital spaces, and hopefully things to look for and things to avoid when trying to find your digital community. Personally, me, my story, I came to my PhD via the program at Penn State, the Information Sciences and Technology program at Penn State. And while I was studying there, we did a lot of games for girls camps, trying to get girls into STEM fields. And the reason why we were doing that is that we saw video games as kind of a gateway activity, right? All the game developers tend to play the same type of games, have the same sort of hobbies. It's kind of like every doctor you meet always plays golf, and they bond off of golf. They have that same shared experience that they can relate to in order to be part of that community. And we're trying to build that in order to expand the scope of the type of people who are in the games industry back at Penn State. And so early on in my research, I found that online communities are a really important doorway for people to get into both the games industry, but into any sort of creative, constructive activity. So later on, I did some more research with online communities, taking a look at sites like Kotaku and Reddit, and how people would bandwagon on topics. And this led me to explore other game creating, game developing communities, such as looking at the IGDA, which is the International Game Developers Association, and big network events like GDC, which is the Game Developers Conference in San Francisco. In San Francisco now. It used to be in LA. And other events like that. So that's my perspective about it. Paul, why don't you talk about your perspective on what do online digital communities mean for you?
Yeah, so for myself, coming from a content creation side, I got my start in podcasting very briefly by reaching out to a couple people making a podcast about a game that I liked. And I offered to, I was really just passionate about the game and I really enjoyed their content, and they were kind of new and just getting the ball rolling. But both of the people hosting the show, Charles McFall and Brian Ibbett, were established long-running podcasters. So I reached out and I offered to kind of supplement their content by doing some written articles or something like that. And one thing led to another, and they gave me an opportunity to guest on an episode that Brian was going to be out on, and the rest is history. And so, similar to what you're talking about, community is everything, because I was very fortunate to meet two people who were open to, first of all, building communities around their content, which is vital to content creators, but also to mentoring up-and-coming people interested in joining the space. And as a matter of fact, they were both heavily involved with the DragonCon Digital Media, now called the Digital Media Content Creators track. It used to be the podcasting track, where they would basically just have, DragonCon runs 5 days. It's craziness. And all of us podcasting nerds would hang out in the basement of the Hilton at the podcasting track and have endless panels like this talking about everything from technical side of podcasting to community to networking to just having shows. And it was such a vital aspect of just bolstering my passion in content creation, because I found like-minded people. And some of us had wildly different content that we were making. Some people might be making shows about fandom, or some people might be making something very technical. It runs the gamut. But the point was, we're all using content creation, whether it be podcasting or streaming or making videos for YouTube, to reach an audience, to bolster and build communities. And it was super vital to that. And to this day, I've met literally dozens of people through that community, both through the podcasting that we were doing ourselves and people we met that way, and also just through the DragonCon Digital Media track. That just opened so many doors. We've collaborated, we've been on each other's podcasts. It's been wonderful. And finding that community is how I got to getting 5-6 years under my belt as a content creator. I would never have gotten this far without the support of other content creators, and also just the revitalizing energy of having people to talk to about the things that you're doing and that you're into.
Exactly. One of the key things, or one of the tropes, memes within the game development community, is that no game company is ever going to hire you to make a video game unless you already have made a video game, right? It's like that catch-22, right? Mm-hmm. And so more often than not, I have students that are like, okay, I want to be a game developer. I want to program games. It's like, okay, how many games have you made? Well, no, I haven't. I'm here to learn how to do that. It's like, well, you're here to gain that practice, but a lot of, there's a reason why the old trope with the game industry was two guys in the basement, right? And working together, experimenting, pushing the limits of what their technology could do, right? And then sharing that experience with other like-minded individuals, and then making bigger and bigger and bigger projects, right? Snowballing that. We've kind of the internet's kind of weird how when we were growing up, the internet was this new, fascinating new space. But the next generation, they've been growing up with the internet always there, right? Mm-hmm. So one of the problems I kind of have is trying to conceptualize how the next generation of students have in terms of their relationship with the internet and their relationship with digital communities, and it does seem a little bit different than how we maybe grew up with them, right? Maybe we found a community through our fandoms, right? Like we went through sci-fi, or we went through video games, or we went through you know
Pretty much anything.
But these days, I see communities much more focused. Instead of consuming content like we were when we were like growing up, in terms of actually making content, right? We have the Web 2.0, and we have people making videos, making podcasts, making their own video games, and being able to join those communities and be active contributors as opposed to just lurkers. So I guess the one key thing I hope everyone who's watching maybe can possibly take away from this is that those communities exist out there, and it's great to look at them and read and learn. But you also, they are interactive. You can post, you can interact with chat, and thanks for everyone who's interacting with the chat right now. Kathleen, I hope I guess you're saying the Utica Library is your favorite place to be. And unfortunately, we can't be, face to face at this con, but the digital technology means that everyone's just a click away, right? So, Paul, could you maybe talk a little bit about, your experience in trying to learn the ins and outs of doing podcasting? Like who really mentored you in that regard?
Well, yeah. So my first show was called From the Helicarrier, and I joined it, as I mentioned, a little bit along the way. And Charles and Brian, the hosts of that, they took me under their wing, mostly because I guested on the episode, as I mentioned, and I did pretty well with Charles, just one-on-one with us. And because of that, the funny story is that Charles was originally not interested in working with me at all, but then Brian had listened to it and liked it and said, "Hey, let's have him on next week with both of us and see how it goes." And then I was on the show forever, pretty much almost until the end. And because of that, their mentorship, their encouragement, they really just gave me a safe space to do what I finally wanted to do. Like I had kind of dreamed of content creation for a long time. I finally had a voice. And because they were holding me up, the phrase standing on the shoulder of giants, they were holding me up, and it allowed me to find my feet on my own. And they provided some, tips of oh, this is how you clean up your audio and this and that and everything. But really what was most important about that is we formed a community around our show.
Right.
And because we formed that community, we formed some really long-lasting bonds with other people. And we ultimately ended up forming a network out of that, the Giant Size Team Up Network. And for a time, we kept bringing shows and other creators under the banner. And we would regularly bring people in who were better at it than we were, that were just absolutely killing it. And so we got to collaborate, we got to learn from each other, and it just became this think tank of what can we do to push our content forward? What can we do to be better at what we're doing? And then also supporting other people. My favorite story to come out of the From the Helicarrier days is because of that show, we had some friends in Australia start a toy collecting podcast called Toy Power. Go check them out. They're a lot of fun. And, so they're roughly in the elder millennial age group. So they're focused mostly on the 80s and maybe a little bit into the 90s, that golden age of toys, particularly He-Man, Transformers, all that kind of stuff. And they just celebrated doing it for 3 years, I think it was,
right.
Which is, or it might even be longer. It's crazy. And they started off by being hey, we're thinking about doing this thing. Can you give us some tips? And we did. We provided a little bit of feedback. We helped them clean up their audio a bit. And here they are. They're just absolutely killing it. And they're occupying a unique space that it's really exceptional. And they've interviewed some fantastic people involved in the toy industry and stuff, which is just incredible. And so it's stuff like that. You build your community, you form your relationships, you foster it. And the biggest thing for us was the people who brought me under their wing were welcoming and supportive,
right.
but also sometimes honest. So like, you know, if we didn't have a good show, if I got a little too ranty, I got some feedback on that, and sometimes that's needed. But more than anything, just being like, it really doesn't matter your level of experience or your level of knowledge. Passion is often enough to at least get you started.
Yeah.
And yeah, you'll grow into it from there.
Yeah, we definitely should talk about passion at length, because what we're talking about are communities of passion, right? People who are passionate about a particular topic, people who are passionate about a particular activity, and want to share that passion with others who share those interests. And when it comes to at least my experience with game design and with the games industry, you know, I was extremely passionate. There wasn't really a game design program at Penn State, right? My degree from Penn State is in information sciences and technology. And there wasn't a digital video games program at Penn State. And, you know, I don't think they even have one there as of right now. But, you know, there is some aspect of, you know, well, there's computer science, and, you know, there's these other areas that have interaction as part of them. But if I wanted to, you know, pursue this as a career, I had to kind of build my own community, right? So as I saw IST as a this new up and coming program where I could, you know, integrate with, maybe find a professor who's interested in interaction the way I'm interested in, and, you know, kind of mold that to where I wanted to go. And as we were talking about earlier, when you join these groups, you don't necessarily know where you're going to end up, right? You know that you have a good idea that you're passionate about these things, but you don't know exactly. You might end up as in game design. You might end up as an app developer, or you might end up, you start off, talking about a very specific video game, Paul, but then you ended up talking about all of pop culture, right? With the podcast. And so, one thing I wanted to kind of address with these online communities is that you might fail at, finding the right one at the first time, or you might try to start doing some things, and the first couple times you try to make a project, the first couple times you make something, you're probably it's not going to be great. It's going to be bad. And talking to my students, they're always like, oh, like, I can't make a CV. It's like, why can't you make a CV? It's like, because, I don't have any good projects to put on my CV. It's like, well, just because the project isn't good doesn't necessarily mean that you shouldn't put it on your CV. What's important to put on your CV, and what's important and what you get from these digital online communities, is the experience, right? If you know something's bad, how do you know it's bad? What did you learn from that experience? And make sure that, explain to your potential employer or your potential partners in future endeavors that you've learned from that experience and you're not going to make those same mistakes again, right? Not getting discouraged. And sometimes, the first couple times you look for a community to join and be a part of, and sometimes those first few communities aren't a quite perfect fit. And then you have to, develop those relationships and maybe search those contacts you have made for more communities to join, right?
Yeah.
Do you have any experience that you want to, you can kind of point to, something that didn't work the way you wanted it to work?
Well, I mean, frankly, as you mentioned, we started as a podcast that focused on a video game, a particular game. And as time went on, we saw that the support for that game was starting to dwindle and it was likely going to be sunset. And we had already started covering like what was going on in the MCU and other popular comic related stuff, because our game was comic related. Right. And the next thing we knew, we had taken like an hour and a half show to a 3-hour show because we were spending 90 minutes covering pop culture. And so we spun off the show and we started our network. And when we did that, it kind of changed the game. It let us clean up the original show so that it was just about the game for the people who cared about the game. And then our new pop culture show found its own audience. Some of those people came over, but for the most part, it was an entirely different and new audience. And, that show we did 5 years as Breaking the Panel. And our cast changed several times over the years. And just sometimes, as a matter of fact, your wife Erin in chat said, sometimes you find the perfect fit, but then you outgrow it. And our dynamics changed over time, and we had to constantly reassess and say, is this the show that we want to be making? Are we happy with this product? And if not, what can we do to change it? And so it's kind of not that different than game design, like especially as somebody who's a student or a prospective student. You have to throw yourself at your projects. You have to try things. And you learn so much more through failure than you do through success. As a matter of fact, I think
it's really good takeaway.
I think if success comes too easy, you'll coast. And so it's the same with finding communities. If you just fall into the right community, you'll just get comfortable, and you won't realize how special it is sometimes until it's gone. And I can speak from experience. Not every relationship that I formed in podcasting over the last 6 years lasted. And I do miss some of those relationships because it's unfortunate they didn't work out. But whether they be actual collaborative, professional, or whether they be personal, things happen. People grow and move on. Their interests change. Maybe they were gung-ho about the thing you were doing at this point, and then they decide they don't want to do it anymore. So you have to be reactive to the things that are going on, but you also have to be proactive. You have to throw yourself at new challenges and just try things. And Emily Swan in chat, who is, one of these people I met through this wider community, who is absolutely killing it right now with her Doodle Crew project, which is a collective of artists who are streaming art content together under her banner and just putting out incredible stuff on a regular basis. The discouragement could just shut you down if you let it, but that project that they're working on has blossomed in incredible ways, and I'm sure it doesn't look anything like it initially did when Emily first kind of thought it up. So it's, like I said, through these challenges, through these difficulties, you will grow as a person, and your work, whether it be actual, like the industry you want to go into work, or whether it be personal passion projects, will grow and you'll improve drastically.
And that's a really great point. And that kind of is a good segue to the next section that we want to talk about, is platforms themselves, right? And we before, if you wanted to find a community, you have to go someplace like the library, right? And go to a meetup, like a board game meetup, a collective meetup, or you would try to find very esoteric message boards, right? And with the Web 2.0's revolution, everyone can be a content creator, and there's so many places to possibly find communities and connect with communities and communicate with communities in the modern era. I remember a few years ago, I sometimes sit as a reader for graduate projects, and I had already heard of Twitch. I had already been watching Twitch, but someone did his thesis on Twitch, and specifically about maker streams on Twitch, and how this tool that was primarily used by gamers to stream video game content and talk about and show each other playing video games, was being used by artisans in order to build communities around their artwork, show themselves working on their artwork, and promote it, sell it, and basically is this whole new space along the lines of DeviantArt and other Web 1.0 style art and creative communities, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I wanted to take a little bit and talk about some of our favorite platforms and how this has kind of democratized the creation of media, right? So I mean, back in my day, I think we both probably started on things like IRC chat, right? MRIC chat, right?
Yep.
And
message boards,
user groups, and such like that.
Yep.
But I mean, things have expanded so greatly. I remember the first time I heard about Reddit was when I was writing my thesis for college. So I mean, before that, you had blogs like Slashdot um, and other message boards based blogs out there, but Reddit was had this new interface going, and the amount of different subgroups on Reddit really, I think, kind of revolutionized what we thought of in terms of a community board, right? Of some place where anyone can go look for content and get the freshest content, right? And of what's going on within those specific communities.
Yeah. Reddit as a platform, it is both a source for content, but also a source for communities. Right. And it's, for some people, like particularly if you live like in a remote area or something, it might be the only opportunity for you to find people who care about the thing you care about.
Right.
Which is kind of vital.
I mean, you could definitely find some of the more traditional communities moving online spaces. Like, I'm sure there's probably a Discord and message boards for DragonCon, right? Like,
oh yeah.
And so you kind of have those traditional communities moving on to the online space, but then you have those online spaces that have just exploded in terms of their own communities and almost eventually then become in-person meetups as well. One thing that comes to mind is the Penny Arcade community, right? There was a group of people who were very vested into that webcomic, who then they made PAX, and now PAX has kind of replaced E3 as the major community meetup for the video game, both for gaming, both digitally and on tabletop. So,
oh yeah, to speak to that, almost everything has humble beginnings. For example, you want to talk about platforms. I would say like the biggest three resources you have for finding community these days is probably Reddit. You could also include Facebook groups because they're pretty active still. A lot of people have moved off of Facebook for various reasons, but there are still very active, engaged groups on there depending on what your interest or your goal is. But Reddit, but then you have Discord. And then I would say YouTube/Twitch for actual content like videos, information, that kind of stuff. And
we'll talk a little bit more about Discord. I was building up to it, but yes.
Well, just most of those platforms/services didn't start the way that they are now.
Right.
And so those things changed over time, and it kind of just it became a snowball effect, Mm-hmm. And so yeah, go ahead. Didn't mean to derail you.
No, continue. Like, I was going to talk about, like, we could talk a little bit about specific groups that people might want to look for if, like, they want to be part of the either game creating community or the podcasting community, right? One community that I wanted to pay particular attention to is the IGDA. So the IGDA has been a community for a very long time. It stands for the International Game Developers Association. I've been a member for many, many years, both as a student and now as a professional professor. And they have chapters all across the country, all across the world. And they are, primarily very, very active in organizing things like GDC and putting on things like game jams. There's a really active IGDA chapter in Albany. I participated in their game jam over the pandemic. And if you, like, for those like students or hobbyists who really want to get in on the games industry, like you want to know, like, how do I get a job at one of these things? Finding a mentor through the IGDA is a really huge boon. And if you take a look, like, Discord is a revelation in terms of connectivity, and it's all the nice features of the old IRC chats paired with the nice linking features of more modern blogging systems, and plus video and voice chat and like chat rooms. So it's all those nice features all paired into one nice space. And so if you don't have Discord, please, it's free, go get it. And the only downside I think that people have, that Discord has compared to maybe old traditional like PHP boards or these other online communities is that it's not very searchable. Like if you do like a Google search, you're not going to find information deep within a Discord, right? Like you might find that a Discord exists, but the actual information on the Discord isn't necessarily indexable. Whereas if that stuff was just freely open on the internet, it might be a little bit easier to find. But I'm trying to think. The other groups that I want to talk about in terms of local to the Utica area, and for those of you who are joining us because this is the Utica Library Pandemicon, we have the Thinkubator in Utica, run by the MVCC. If you have some crafts that you're making that you want to build into a business, the Thinkubator can help you craft a business plan and get that business up and running. If you're coming in from the Albany area, Albany has Tech Valley and a makerspace up there. And even right now with our friends, they have the Neighborhood Art Collective, and they're going to be at the Mayfair up in Holland Patent later today, this weekend. So it doesn't have to be games. It doesn't have to be comics. If you like, I'm sure there's a cosplay community here in Utica. There's all sorts of ways to reach out, and if there isn't a community, find like-minded people to make a community. Paul, why don't you talk about some of your favorite communities?
Well, I've been involved in lots of communities over the years. Going all the way back about 10 years ago, I was really invested in Magic the Gathering and fell into some communities through that. Some of them were local and some of them were online. I got, the podcasting, various video games I've played over the years. I've actually a couple of times fallen into a group of people, in particular, one group of people I became friends with were because of a content creator for the game Warframe, which is a free-to-play game. And the content creator had a Discord, and I joined it. And I originally joined it to learn things about the game and to talk about stuff and figure things out. And then I met people, and the next thing I know, they had spun off and started their own Discord where it was kind of like the Wild West. They could do whatever they wanted. And I fell in with those people, and I gamed with those people for literally hundreds of hours, maybe not directly, but we would be hanging out in Discord together and formed lasting friendships. I still get messaged by one of them to this day. And I haven't been super active in that community in about 3 years. So it's amazing how you can fall in with a group of people and form meaningful relationships. Right. And you have to be open to it, but also cautious. We'll talk about a little bit of that a little bit later, but you'd be surprised what you'll bump into and if you're open to it. And there's probably a community for almost anything out there. And if there isn't, form your own, or maybe sometimes people bump into communities that they just don't like the vibe of, Oh, I like this thing. Let's say, for example, cosplay. I like cosplay. I joined a couple cosplay communities. I really didn't like the vibe in there. I kind of wanted to do a different thing. Start your own. And
also,
sorry, go ahead.
And also, please be careful. Don't expect to join a community of a few million people and expect your voice to be heard.
Right.
Like if you want to have that, the best communities are the ones that you actually know the people in, right?
Yep.
And you like 100 people, it's fantastic. That's a really great community. You can know 100 people. You can't really know 1,000 or anything quite larger. And if the community is centered around a personality, like your favorite Twitch streamer, like if they're really, really popular, or your favorite company or something like that, those type of communities are great to be fans of and great to participate in. But you aren't necessarily the best for creative communities in terms of being able to interact with them and to get feedback on your own work, right? Yeah. And so one of the reasons I wanted to do this for this particular talk is that Utica's a small community. It has all the resources of a larger town, but there is a smaller group of people here. You can make really personal, great relationships, and reach out and a lot of people like, I can't start this because I don't have the resources of a place like Syracuse or New York City or Boston, right? Like we don't have the numbers to really go. It's like, but you know what? You have people here, and trust me, there are people who share your interests in your local community. And that sometimes can get lost when you're taking a look at some of these larger online platforms, right? With the community that's coming out to support us here today, they're not necessarily like, we don't number in the hundreds, but we're devoted to each other, and we support each other, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's the most important thing, is to just to be loyal to who helped you, and right. And also to those that you've mentored, and show support. In particular, like Doodle Crew, I don't necessarily make every single stream, but when I am there, I try to be engaged. I try to participate. And if I think of something, and I know your wife, Erin, does the same thing, so inspiration comes to mind, and you reach out and you say, hey, it would be great if you guys tried this or something. Just throwing it out there. Right. So helpful suggestions go a long way as well.
Right.
But I would avoid trying to change a community that you've just joined. We can talk about that more later, but go in with an open mindset, go in to be open and supportive, but also receptive to the culture, and see how things go. But yeah, the loyalty is everything. Going and supporting, in my area, content creation, going and supporting our fellow content creators is huge, because it takes a lot to put work out there. And I'm sure it's the same in game design.
It takes extreme amounts of work, as most games, how many of the really great games have you heard about that are vaporware? Because, they put massive amounts of money into it, and, you just never come out. Because they take a lot of work. Also, one other thing before we move on to what to look out for and the red flags. The modern internet is multifaceted, and so we talked about Discord, we talked about Twitch, we talked about YouTube, and our communities exist on all of these platforms, right?
Yep.
Right, Paul? And I don't think any community in this day and age exists solely on only one platform. There might be one platform that's their quote unquote primary channel, right? The way that people get together or interact with the most, but you should look out for those other branches and trees, or branches of the tree, as it were, when trying to join a community, and see some of them might be more interactive than others, and based on the tools that those platforms give to viewership, right? So Discord, great interactivity, right? Yeah. YouTube, I don't know many people who spend their time reading YouTube comments.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah. So from a content creator side, networking is everything, and being on all of the relevant platforms is also important. It can be really tedious to I'm not a Instagram person, and I'm barely a Twitter person, but you're right. Yeah, you and me both. However, if you're trying to make content full time, whether it be as a streamer or as a YouTuber, regardless of the actual substance of your content, you need to be on Facebook, you need to be on Twitter, you need to be on Instagram, and you need to at least cross-post your content for discoverability. And it's a huge thing. And as you said, Discord is wonderful for fostering a community and for having communication. But right. All of these other platforms are rough.
If Discord does not face outward very well.
No, and that is the other thing. So Discord is it's your clubhouse, right?
Right.
And we did this on Facebook from the Helicarrier, 5 years ago. We formed the Agents Only Lounge for our Patreon supporters. And our rules were simple. If you've supported us on Patreon ever, you're in for life, basically, as long as you don't cause trouble. And that group of several hundred people was really tight-knit, and it really was a clubhouse. And those were our most passionate fans. They helped each other out in the game that, we were all playing. They gave us feedback on our content and everything. But they weren't necessarily great at getting our word out there. We still had to be active on other platforms. So use all the tools that are out there. And I'll say it, it's tedious. It's nobody wants to write their Insta posts and their Twitter. Like I post Crash Test Pilots, the show I do with my fiance Nicole. We post it on, it's hosted on Anchor, and we post it to Facebook and Twitter. And I still hate writing those posts, even though they're short little blurbs. But do it, because that is how people see you. That's how people are reminded of you. Even
and that's how people are going to join your community, right? That's how your community grow, right? And then if you're lucky, other people will link to those. Those are the doors, as to invite new people into your communities. If you're looking to build them. So,
Emily in chat said, I think the digital age networking has taken away a little bit of the in-person pressure to be a good speaker. You can share and interact with contact and build network that way. And I agree with that. One of my interests is tabletop miniature painting. And there are lots of content creators who don't make videos, who don't stream, but they post their work on Instagram, and it's incredible. And that platform is vital for them, but they don't necessarily have to flex the skills that are required for all the other platforms. So find your niche, but also, post every place else so that people can find you. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I think I'm trying to think if there's anything else we want to say in terms of platforms. I think we're probably ready to talk about red flags, right?
Sure.
So let's talk a little bit about things to avoid. And so we're saying go out there, go find communities. And probably one of the biggest hindrances you will get to trying to find new communities and great people to interact with are filter bubbles. If anyone in chat or watching is not aware what a filter bubble is, Facebook is one giant filter bubble. Your Netflix, your suggested what you should potentially or what's popular on Netflix is a filter bubble. Filter bubbles occur when you're using search algorithms or using the content providers are using algorithms to kind of guess at what you would be interested in. And as good as with all the advances we have made in AI, it's still kind of crap. And so what usually gets promoted are things that are popular, not necessarily the things that are going to help you grow as a creator or the things that you're going to be most interested in, right? So
it's kind of a double-edged sword.
Right.
Because I have, for example, in the content that I'm interested in on YouTube, through their discovery algorithms, I have found things that are now some of my favorite things.
Yeah.
But I've also been shown a lot of stuff I have no interest in. And so it can be pretty... It can be pretty depressing sometimes to just get bombarded by, like, you Google search something once and all of a sudden you're just getting bombarded by that thing for a couple days.
Yeah.
So you got to be careful, like, and realize that there's likely more out there than what the algorithm is showing you, whether it be on Facebook, whether it be Google, or whether it be YouTube, any of those. So it's just because you're being bombarded by a certain content creator who's in your area of interest or, work or anything like that, or a company or anything like that, don't think that that's the only thing that's out there. And also don't assume that, like, that content creator or instructor or whatever is the only correct voice in that space, because there could be other dissenting voices that have good points that you want to kind of consider. So take the broad scope of everything.
The inverse for creators is also true. If you're trying to build a community, you might need to expand the keywords that are associated with your community, right? You might have to. I'm pretty sure this doesn't work anymore, but one of the most hilarious stories I heard about using algorithms to one's benefit was someone who was looking for a job and was having a very hard time finding a job, getting his resume in the hands of people who needed it. So what he ended up doing was buying an ad on Google under the search terms of what his job was. And so that when people search for help in that particular area, his resume would come up. And he quickly got a job that way. I don't think that works anymore. I don't think Google allows that type of stuff anymore. But that's the sort of, like, backwards thinking you kind of have to do in order to kind of grow your communities these days.
And the algorithm is ever changing too. So
And you can talk. I mean, so many YouTube creators have talked about how like the changes to YouTube have killed their viewership ratings, right?
Yep.
And I'm sure and less so algorithmic, but more so policy changes with Twitch, right? Like so many people have to be very, very mindful of the background music they're playing during Twitch streams, because one false move and all of a sudden your replays are silent because Nintendo claimed the remix of a Mario tune or something of that nature, right?
To that effect, as a content creator, particularly in our space, we have seen dramatic changes on various platforms. You mentioned Twitch. YouTube also changed a lot of their policies in recent years. Some people have heard of Adpocalypse. You might have heard of the COPA stuff with content directed at children. There are content creators who were having successful, thriving content channels on these platforms that were suddenly like gutted by policy changes. And you have to be very careful, and you have to be willing to adapt. And so I've seen a couple of people adapt to those changing conditions and survive, but many just fell off. So don't ever think that like the avenue that you're taking is perfectly safe. That was another little piece of advice I would give. Whether it be in content creation or whether it be a pathway into an industry you want to join, you never know when the thing that you're hyper focused on will suddenly just become defunct overnight. So
also,
be careful.
To talk about being safe, beware certain communities. One thing that I've come to have students ask me about a couple of times are different educational programs for game design, and whether they are legit or whether they are scams, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you have a lot of people who's like, oh, our community, we will get you a job in the game industry. Just pay us a couple $1,000s to join into our community, quote unquote community of creators, and we'll send you a packet of instructions, and then get rich quick educational type of things. There are a lot of great legit educational outlets out there. There are a lot of professionals in the industry who may have gotten a little bit tired of working in the industry, who are now looking to education as a secondary career. I'm not saying, there are varying degrees of quality. Some people have had great success with a lot of these, with working maybe more one-on-one with a successful developer and learning from that successful developer. Some people like a more traditional accredited college. But if someone wants to be your friend only if you give them money, that should cause a red flag, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and even with, not just in game development, but with podcasting too, right? I'm sure there's probably a lot of stories, at least back in the day, of like conglomerates or like media groups, right? Like join and we'll advertise for you and we'll make you a media, we'll make you go viral type of stuff, right, Paul?
Yeah, I'm not going to name names, but there have been various services and platforms that have tried to basically monetize a service to us, the creator, whether they were hosting or whether they were distribution, and they promise things that don't always come through. We were on a platform for a long time with From the Helicarrier and Breaking the Panel that used to generate ad revenue for us for a little while. It wasn't a lot, but it was more than nothing, which is great as an independent content creator. And it was all well and good for a while, but then next thing you know, like everything fell through, like the checks stopped coming and such. And so like you have to ask yourself, what are you offering up, in your agreements to interact with someone or to be on a platform or on a service or anything like that? Mm-hmm. What are the cost benefits? And things change. This is one of the reasons why I always preach, be ready to adapt to changing conditions, because they do change. There were ways of doing stuff in podcasting that were valid as little as 4 or 5 years ago that are now completely archaic and just not the best way to do things. And there are also communities of people who are very much stuck in that old mindset. Mm-hmm. I moderated a panel at DragonCon 2019 with somebody who runs a major company in the space that charges podcasters money to host their content, who hated us talking about platforms like YouTube and Twitch and how to monetize through them, because he's like, that's not podcasting. Like, that's not, but it's an old guard mindset you have to be kind of careful of sometimes. So just, these people have wisdom, they do, but weigh it against like the reality, your reality, and what your goals are, and realize that sometimes people are left holding a bag because they just don't know that things have changed.
And for those younger kids who might be watching Pandemicon, be careful of any sort of game that promises they'll make you money. Most recently, there's been a discussion of the one game Roblox, or is it
Roblox?
Yeah. And Roblox is very, very popular. They say that you can make games in it. You can. You can't really pull your games out of Roblox, and so like I wouldn't consider Roblox a very like. It would. It's not the end goal of any sort of game developer, as it were. So, and you need to be careful of that sort of stuff. Also, when you're talking about communities, you're talking about getting close to people. You're getting like sharing, your personal life experiences and such. But with all of that, you should be careful and make yourself an online persona, because the last thing you want to do to yourself on the internet is dox yourself, right?
Oh boy.
Yeah.
As my online persona has my name in it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as we talked about earlier, being an academic, I have to put my names on papers. I have to promote myself and my identity as it is with my, birth given name. And so I don't really get to take on a persona in the academic world. But on the online world, I tend to go by Simkin. I try to, as most as possible, put on that persona. So that anonymity gives you some amount of protection, right? And Paul, if you wanted to talk a little bit more about that.
Well, I have a really quick story to tell. My partner, Nicole, and I stream. We both stream on Twitch. Not so much lately myself, but she's going to be streaming later today. So go check out Mayor Squish. Casual plug. We were streaming a game called Cube World when it came. It was a game that was in beta for 6 years, and then they released an alpha version, and we were streaming it when it first came out. And there was an exploit that allowed people to enter other people's multiplayer games and use a god mode to kill them. Through that getting done to us, we got stream sniped that way, and it was being done to us, and we ended our stream and everything. But then through the stream/Steam, they found my partner's information. And next thing you know, there was a 4chan thread with a bunch of relatively, not the full personal doxing, but more information than we were comfortable with. So be very careful. And if you feel unsafe or you feel like things are becoming threatening or toxic or anything like that, make sure you get out of that community. Keep your socials locked down too. If you're on Facebook, do not let everybody under the sun see all your personal information, like where you work, where you live necessarily. You can have some basics on there, but don't give everybody the story, because it can be used to hurt you. And doxing has become a huge story in anything online related for at least the last 10 years. And there are bad actors out there. If you do anything that could remotely rub somebody the wrong way, whether it be you make a game that's controversial in any way, or whether you make content that people disagree with in any way, somebody might try to find a way to get at you, hurt you, or even just psychologically harm you. So be careful. Build a persona if you can. One of the biggest things that's happening in content creation in the last, I would say, year or two is the rise of the VTubers. People who use a virtual avatar as their online persona. And, they use mocap and everything to perform while they're on screen, but they are a digital, usually an anime type character. They are a digital avatar as their persona. And some people love it. It's really big with the kids, as they say. But it gives these people a level of anonymity that protects them. And I think that's a wonderful thing. And so people can still enjoy your content or your projects without necessarily knowing exactly who you are and where you grew up and, what your mother's maiden name is. Because
they're here to interpret the persona, not necessarily you.
Right?
And, be safe. Don't give out personal information, and you develop those relationships, and those relationships will grow over time, and you'll get a feeling of who to trust and who not to think. But realize that, hey, online communities are by their nature somewhat public, right?
Yep.
Even though you might feel safe sharing it with your community as it is right now, you don't know who's going to possibly join that community in the future.
Yep.
Right. And so, and everything that's on the internet will always be on the internet forever.
Yeah.
It's like, what was the saying within academic and professional communities? Write every email as if it will one day read in court. That's
yeah. Well, there's a story right now in the news about Jeopardy. The new host. Exactly. The new host has been dethroned after one day of recording episodes because of a podcast he was on like 6 years ago, where he said some things that were not flattering. And so, yeah, the internet is forever, and you can absolutely have your old content brought back to hurt you. Be careful what you put out there, and if you're going to put something out there that might be considered controversial or risque by anybody, make sure that you have a persona that separates who you are as an individual from your online content or your projects or whatever they may be, is my recommendation.
And finally, I think we have maybe 3 more minutes, or maybe even less. I just want a list of things what not to do, at least with the game design community, and maybe Paul can share 1 or 2 things from the podcasting things of don't do this. Yep. Don't go to any game developer or any potential partner and say, I'm an ideas guy as a game developer. Everyone's an ideas person. Your ideas aren't unique. The wheel has been made 1,000 times. Go try to, if you want to work in the games industry or you want to be a creative, find one thing that you're really good at, be it art, be it programming, be it some skill that you're really great at, and develop that skill as much as possible. Just don't say, I have great ideas, I want other people to develop them for me. You will be shunned very, very quickly.
And quite frankly, a great idea on paper doesn't always translate to a good idea in practicality. It's not always achievable. It's not always something that a lot of people are into. If you're making a video game, you want that game to appeal to as broad an audience as possible, usually. There are people who make very niche games for a very niche audience, but they know that going in, and it's usually a project of passion rather than a project to hopefully lead to success. And it's the same with content creation. You want to basically just make something as broad as possible. And I agree with you. Everybody's an ideas guy. Everybody thinks that they have the best take on this situation or that situation. Just know that you can be wrong, and that you can be inexperienced, and that there could be somebody out there, oftentimes somebody who's quite silent, maybe not the loudest voice in the room, who's actually very knowledgeable about the thing that you're talking about or trying to achieve. And, be open to listening to that and realizing that you probably don't have all the answers, no matter how experienced you are.
Essentially, what it boils down to: don't make a bad first impression. Stay humble. Too, yeah. Gracious,
Stay humble is hashtag stay humble.
I think we're about to ready to wrap up.
I'm back.
Hey.
Welcome back.
If you guys are ready to wrap up, is there anything else you want to add last minute? Because this was really a fantastic talk. I cannot thank you both enough for this.
Well, thank you for having us.
Thank us for having us. Hopefully, we get some people joining local communities from this talk as they watch it. Please check out, I think there's a Ren Fair happening in Holland Palette this weekend, Mayfair on the Green. Check that out. Check out the Neighborhood Art Collective. Check out SUNY Poly. We're going back to in-person, and while, we have to keep with COVID protocols, I know my students really want to do more in terms of reaching out to the community. So we need to bridge hopefully coming out of the COVID, we can bridge some of these gaps and build more vibrant creative communities in the Utica area.
Perfect. Well, thank you guys. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to use this opportunity to plug myself and my friends really quick. I mentioned earlier Doodle Crew, Emily Swan. She leads an amazing group of artists. My fiance Nicole is involved with that as well. Go check that out. They're on Twitch and all the social medias. You can find me on Twitch and Twitter at Soapbox Klotz. And check out Nicole and my show, Crash Test Pilots. Thank you for having me.
Perfect. And one last plug for the rest of Fandemicon today. Sorry. Check us out. Next coming up is a really fun craft video we put together. And if you're interested in it, you can either use things around your house, or we do have craft kits at the Utica Library. Give us a call and we'll get one to you. Not a problem. And I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. And I hope everybody checks out the rest of Fandemicon. Bye.
Bye, everyone.